there's so much going on right now, and it feels very overwhelming. And that is by design. And then also people think that their voices don't count in this country anymore. And in some ways, I would say, yeah, like billionaires have like stepped in and there's got a lot of influence over what is happening. But our voices don't count if we don't use them. And I still believe in democracy and I still believe in the people. And so no matter what it is, I think like talking to your neighbors, taking action. Like if you're into art, make some like bumper stickers or make some drawings. If you're into music, make a song or like sing about, this land is your land, do a cover of it, whatever it is. Add your talent to this and do something about it because I again, like the squeaky wheel gets the grease in this country, which basically means that like we the people have to stand up and say this is what we want. We have to demand it. And I think that happened in the public land sale. We should all, revel in that, I would say, but also know that this fight is far from over and there's many other things that are happening.
I'm Meg Carney, an outdoor and environmental journalist, and this is the Outdoor Minimalist podcast. Thank you for joining us so that together we can create a better outdoor space as we recreate. Remember when Mike Lee's 3.3 million acre land sales were making headlines what felt like every few seconds? I mean, it was all over social media. Every conservation organization was talking about it, and even friends of mine who I've never known to be very civically involved gathered the gumption to call their senators. Well, despite the fact that as a collective, we rallied together to defeat all three of Mike Lee's most recent attempts to sell public lands, Trump's big, ugly bill passed in the Senate. And within the hundreds of pages of legislation, many public lands attacks still remain. And while I do my best to cover most public lands news every Friday on this podcast, hearing from others in the outdoor advocacy community can shed light on things we may not have considered and help foster conversations needed to continue this fight. That's why I'm excited to introduce Land Tawney to episode 189 of the Outdoor Minimalist podcast. Land is co-chair of American Hunters and Anglers, an energetic, media-based organization built on holding policymakers accountable through fast-paced grassroots advocacy. Tawney is a nationally renowned advocate of public land and wildlife. For a decade, he was president and CEO of Backcountry Hunters and Anglers, where under his leadership, they grew exponentially, expanding to 48 states and all the way into Canada, garnering 40,000 members and building an army of public land defenders. He's also testified before Congress on behalf of the Boundary Waters and has served on numerous federal advisory councils in support of hunting, fishing, and conservation. He's held roles within the National Wildlife Federation, where he launched their Vanishing Paradise campaign in support of the Gulf Coast, and the Theodore Roosevelt Conservation Partnership. His 25 years of experience as an advocate, leader, and sportsman make him just as comfortable in a duck blind and trout stream as he is on Capitol Hill. So thank you for joining me on the Outdoor Minimalist podcast today. I don't love talking about this topic, but I think that it is an important one, and I'm glad that you have so much experience to share with our audience. So let's start there. Can you share a little bit about how you got involved in public lands conservation and kind of what keeps you motivated? Because I know sometimes, like this year, it can feel a little demoralizing.
Megan, thank you for having me. I guess I would say that both my parents were the first full-time conservation lobbyists at the state legislature here in my home state of Montana. And so that they were doing that when I was born. And so I feel like I've been around conservation since I was like, basically came out the womb. But I had lots of like mentors, and then I got a wildlife biology degree at the University of Montana, and really just started volunteering for an organization that was brand new at that point called the Theodore Roosevelt Conservation Partnership. And that has led to 25 years. And so when anybody's telling me about how do I get more involved in conservation, I'm like, go volunteer for an organization. So that's how I kind of, I think I was around it all the time. I will say that my father passed away when I was 19, and that was like the largest hole that's ever been created in my life. And at that point, I think I wanted to do more around like carrying on his legacy and the others that came before him. So that's really kind of, if there was like a moment besides me, from the very beginning, I think that would be it. How do I stay motivated? I think especially what just happened, in the Senate, where a bunch of people came together and pushed back against Senator Mike Lee's proposal to sell 3 million acres of public land. Like the community kind of pushback and just people in general that came out of the woodwork to fight against that just gave me like a hope that that we still have opportunities to really, I think carry on this legacy that we was gifted to us. And so that's how I stay motivated. I think is when you win some things, but also, I try to get out. I think Edward Abbey has a quote that was like be a part-time advocate. And what he was saying there is that you got to get outside and realize what you're fighting for. And so I try to spend as much time as I can outside in the woods and on the waters, realizing, really what's at stake here and like what we're fighting for.
Yeah, I will say that it was really interesting to see how much different outdoor communities kind of rallied together to fight against those public land sales in Trump's big, beautiful bill, which he likes to call it, but I like to call it a Trump tax because it's not very beautiful, even if it is very big. And so, if we're looking at what actually passed, not necessarily the public land sales that were removed, what do you think are the most immediate threats that this legislation poses to public lands? Because there are still quite a few things in that bill that threaten access and a variety of different things.
Totally. So I call it the big ugly bill, by the way. Like I think like the tax bill I think is great too. But I would say like one of the immediate one that comes to mind is just this mandate of oil and gas leases in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. Arctic National Wildlife Refuge is, one of the crown jewels, I would say, of our public lands. It was set aside when there was oil and gas development happening on the kind of north slope of Alaska. And so they said, let's like, well, we're going to develop over here. Let's protect something over here. And that was the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. And it's still so important, I think for caribou in particular. But they mandated four lease sales in that, up to 400,000 acres apiece. And so, that's 1.6, million if we're doing our math, right? Like of acres that will now be in the Arctic, forced to be leased. I think that's a problem. There was also some money in there that was obligated to the national park system to try to like help hire more people because they have had, record visitation every single year for the last, decade, I think. And so on top of the 25% cuts that have already happened through the Doge firings, they took away $267 million that was supposed to be for the National Park Service to hire more people. So that's a double whammy in a lot of ways. So those two, I think I would put forward, and just kind of like the overall oil and gas and timber kind of push, which, we need to develop resources in this country, but we do it through the word conservation, which is like the highest, best use for the longest amount of time, for the longest, for the most amount of people. And that's really what Theodore Roosevelt kind of helped set like into motion back in the early 1900s. And when we're hearing about energy dominance, that means that we lose. And so this big ugly bill is all about energy dominance, which means some people are making some money, and we, the people, American people, kind of get the shaft. And so, to me, I think those are probably three. Again, Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, the funding that was taken away from the national park system, and then just the kind of fast tracking of oil and gas development in general, along with timber harvest.
Right, and that's just what's included in the big ugly bill or the Trump tax, whatever you want to call it. That's just
Yeah.
that one piece of legislation because there are a lot of other things that are happening. So, are there things that you think are kind of flying under the radar because the news cycle is so chaotic and volatile right now that maybe we should be paying more attention to?
Yeah, I think that there's the president's like puts forward a budget, which he has done. Congress has to enact that budget, but within that budget are draconian cuts to our federal management agencies. And so these are agencies that, like the National Park Service I already mentioned, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, U.S. Forest Service, Bureau of Land Management, all these agencies that are in charge of really helping us, get the best out of our public lands. They've already been cut, as I mentioned, but with his budget, they're being cut even more. And I think that that's part of this idea of defund the opportunities that we have on our our national forests and all this 640 million acres that belongs to all of us, these public lands. Then it's also like dismantle. So that dismantle piece is like firing all these people. So then like that job, like you can't do the job. And ultimately, that is for the divestiture of our public lands. And that divestiture is just a fancy word of sell it the F off. And to me, the defund, the dismantle, then it leads to the sell off eventually because you can't, you're going to say that we can't manage these lands, right? And so this budget is really bad. Um, Another piece of that budget, there's a thing called the Land and Water Conservation Fund, which was actually passed back when Trump was around the first go around through the Great American Outdoors Act. And what that is it takes money from offshore oil development in the Gulf of Mexico, and it puts that towards access opportunities in every single state. Actually, every single county in America has actually used it. And it goes for swimming pools, parks, golf courses, but also um, fishing access sites. There's large scale conservation easements that happen along with this bill. There's a bunch, or the Land and Water Conservation Fund. There's a bunch of opportunities for access. They're slashing $400 million out of that, which, he signed into law. It's supposed to be $900 million a year for these opportunities. And he was celebrated for it. But now he's coming back and the president's budget again, they're taking out $400 million. So I say all this that this is flying under the radar as you've discussed because it's kind of nerdy, right? Like it's the budget, like who really understands what the budget is really going on. But the opportunity that we have here is that it's actually Congress who sets the budget. So the president puts forward a budget and then the Congress has to approve or make changes to that. So there's still opportunities for us to be engaged with our elected leaders to help stop this part when there's, again, like there's a lot of bad things that are going on, but I think there's an opportunity to stop this piece in particular.
Yeah, so I kind of want to explain that a little bit further, maybe. So like when you're talking about this budget, are you talking about the budget reconciliation or a separate budget? Because I think that that can get confusing.
Totally. And thank you for that question. Budget reconciliation was just about kind of budgets that have happened in the past and like how do we kind of carry those things forward. The actual budget proposal would be come forward in 2026 that the president is proposing right now, and that ultimately Congress has to act. If they do not adopt a new budget, then it goes back to the previous budget that was adopted, and so we'd still not be out of the woods if we didn't adopt a new budget. But this new budget is pretty bad for public lands in particular.
Yeah, I haven't seen a ton of discussion about that quite yet, but maybe because it is like, I guess maybe 6 months out and there's so much other legislation that has been discussed. But beyond like budgetary items, are there other legislative pieces or actions that you have been seeing, say, from the Department of Interior or the USDA, any of the other public lands adjacent or like regulatory agencies that we should be concerned about?
I think that we are blessed with some amazing public lands in this country. And I think Ken Burns, right, called it like the America's best idea when he talked about national parks. But I would say that's in general about public lands. And one place that I think is not on people's radar is the Boundary Waters Wilderness in northern Minnesota. And it's like this amazing place. It's 1.1 million acres. I've been there 3 times. I went there with my kids. Like grandmas can go there. It's like one of the easiest wildernesses to get into, which means it's the most visited wilderness in the entire United States. It has been since it was designated in 1964. And through that, they're trying to put a mine a quarter mile south of the Boundary Waters in Minnesota. And if you know that landscape, all that water flows north. So if the mine is south, but if it's a copper sulfide mine, there's never been a copper sulfide mine in the entire history of the world. Like, think about that. The entire history of the world that hasn't leached bad toxins into the water. And so the Boundary Waters is just, I mean, it's water everywhere. Like, I mean, like, you think about the land of 10,000 lakes, right? Like Minnesota, there's water everywhere. This mine is a quarter mile south, and all that water flows north. And so that one I think is also flying on the radar a little bit. And I think that people, whether you're going to go to the Boundary Waters or not, whether you're going to go to the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge or not, they belong to all of us and they provide so much for us. And clean water in particular is going to be so important as we go forward, as we become more and more arid because of climate change in particular. And so you have this awesome resource of clean water. You can actually put your cup in these lakes and drink it right out of the lake, which is absolutely crazy to me that you can do that. But it's that clean of water, and I don't think we need to put that at risk.
I agree. I'm not sure that I would feel confident enough just drinking the water out of those lakes, but
Not advised.
it
Not
is,
advised, but I've done it.
yeah,
Yeah.
it is very, very clean, as is Lake Superior. And yeah, access to clean water is becoming rarer and rarer. So, like, as the defunding of these public lands occurs, the sell-offs occur, like you said, to this Chilean mine, then we are effectively like ruining a vital resource we need for living. So I think sometimes the legislators, especially coming from Washington, at least from what I have heard from folks on the ground there, is that they often just look at public lands as a budget point, like you're explaining, and they don't see it as a value set in any other capacity. And I think that that can be really hard for people like us who enjoy these public lands in so many different ways. So when we're talking to legislators and lawmakers, how can we communicate that? Because if they're not going there and they're not seeing it and everything is just handed to them, however it is from the grocery store or delivery, whatever, like how can we explain that? Because I do really resonate with like your approach with the more you get outside, the more you're going to care about it.
So I think the first part of that, Megan, is like we got to tell our stories. I think we all have these stories about being out on public lands and on public waters, and those can be, from having picnics with your family and how important that is to bring your family together. Those can be life transformational things. I mean, I've got a lot of stories that I've been involved in myself. I have a young daughter who I think I watched her like like find her inner grit, I would say, on a hike one time that was like an overnight hike and that was really tough. And she found that inner grit and like, she faced adversity, right? And I think like telling those stories of facing adversity and what that means and how uniquely American that is, I think is important. I think that one, we talk about the economy a lot in this country. And I think that was like what the big, beautiful bill was about, right? It was like the economy in general. But the outdoor economy generates $1.2 trillion every single year. And that the cornerstone of that is public lands. And so I think we need to be talking about how they generate, this amazing $1.2 trillion a year, which is a very significant influx into our economy, but also that it's sustainable and that actually can be grown if we care and feed it. So I think we need to talk about the economy. And then the last one is something we've already talked about, but clean water is so important, and 70% of the clean water originates on public lands. And so as clean water becomes more and more finite and much more of a precious resource, we want that to be owned by the people and not some private entity that could hold that over our heads. And so I think those three things really is like, yes, we go out there and we recreate, but it's where we find our solace. I mean, I know during COVID, like that's where I found, like I was freaking out and I go outside and feel a little bit of breeze on my neck and the sun on my face and I feel much better. So there's that piece. That inner grit that I talk about with my daughter. There's the outdoor economy, $1.2 trillion again. And then this idea of clean air and clean water, which I don't think it's hard to put a price tag on what that's worth.
No, and I think we did kind of see a lot of that with the Mike Lee land sell-off attempts, with so many grassroots organizations kind of rallying together to help create scripts and like email templates, etc., giving people the resources to kind of explain those things in their designated areas. And all of these things can feel really overwhelming. It did draw a lot of attention, those land sales, but I think some of that enthusiasm or like momentum has kind of trickled away in the last week or so since this tax bill has dropped. So with so much overwhelm and not being policy experts, just being like an average American that maybe likes to go ride your bike in the park or go, I don't know, what are other public lands things that are not human powered? Ride your
Walk
dirt
a
bike.
dog. Yeah, whatever,
Ride
yeah.
your dirt bike out of public
Yeah.
land. Because I'm trying to think of like all the different activities.
Totally.
Like, how can individuals decide where to focus in on their energy?
It's really good. So I'd say that in a couple of ways. I think first, as you said, there's so much coming at us right now, and that's partly by design. Like they're flooding the zone and they're trying to make things chaotic and they're trying to make things seem overwhelming, which a lot of ways there are. So they want us to be quiet. They want to like flood that zone. So we're like, this is just too much. I'm gonna put my hands up and I'm gonna walk away. That's exactly what we cannot do. And so I think you need to find organizations that you trust to help disseminate that information and let you know about what's going on right now. I would say that the Wilderness Society is one of those. I think the Wilderness Society is absolutely amazing. I obviously I work with American hunters and anglers, and I think that we're on pretty much posting every single day about what's going on. but find somebody online that you trust. I think that like to help disseminate some of this information to you, that is a very quick way. I think that these templates that you talk about, like emails in particular, and then phone calls, like I would say emails are on the bottom scale of importance as far as like actions you can take. And I say that because the chiefs of staff that I talk to all the time out in Washington, D.C., so chiefs of staff of like senators or Congress women and men, they're like, man, emails, that really doesn't break through the noise. It really doesn't. And so phone calls, I think, are the much more effective, though those phone calls and emails in particular, they're one-way streets. Like that's all like you're gonna see, right? Like it's like they're gonna get them and they're gonna go in those offices, and hopefully you have a staffer that's gonna say something to those senators. But I would say emails are kind of bottom rung. Then it goes uh to phone calls. And then like, you said like intercepts is what I call them. If you see them at the local coffee shop or the grocery store or like in the airport, I think that's an opportunity to say hi. Not everybody could do that. Or even, there's not even that many opportunities. But one of the best things that I think is being underlooked right now is the opportunity to really make comments on social media. And I would say that in two ways: tagging people, tagging your elected officials in comments that you're making or in posts that you're making, but then also going to their pages and making comments on their pages. Because what's awesome about that, especially on their own pages, is that they're not gonna, unless you say something really mean or you're derogatory, those comments are gonna stay up there. And so it's like this, instead of this one-way street, everybody can see what's going on. And so I think to me, it's more like a town hall meeting, which a lot of people aren't doing right now because they're worried about the pushback on many things. But this on the on Instagram, Facebook, wherever these elected leaders have pages, which they do, it's such an effective way. And we've heard from chiefs of staff that breaks through the noise right away, because they can't, again, unless you're being um, really derogatory, those comments are going to stay up there, and so everybody gets to see them, and so they're being, I think that breaks through the noise a little bit. So emails, phone calls, but up here I think would be social media interaction.
Yeah, that's really interesting to distinguish between that, because I do think like a lot of people gravitate to the emails because they're the easiest. It takes
Totally.
less than 2 minutes, just click, click, click. And then phone calls can be really scary for people, but everyone is kind of engaging online. I mean, there's like new data from Reuters that came out that says most people are getting their news from social media now versus like a traditional news platform. And so I think a lot of people are really engaged online, and treating it like the town hall meeting, like you said, I think is really interesting. And something that you alluded to earlier is kind of how we utilize our outdoor communities. And I think historically, outdoor communities can be rather segregated. So, like I mentioned the dirt bikers earlier. So, like motorized outdoor enthusiasts, the hook and bullet sector of hunters and anglers, the through hikers, the paddlers, all of them are kind of like in their own little corners. And so, what's a strategy that you've used in the past to kind of unify and mobilize so many different sectors of the industry?
So I think that this is a great question. I think it's like we start from like the basics, basically, is that 640 million acres of federally managed public lands belong to you and I and every other American. Like it's like this amazing like estate that we all own. And so I think like starting there and that common ground that we all own this, and how do we like work together to make sure that it stays in our public hands in particular. But I think these management ideas, I think that yes, like there's some conflicts sometimes, as you kind of are alluding to a little bit, or like these silos that people get into. But I think if we start with that overall idea that we all own 640 million acres, and we are the envy of the world, Megan. Like no other country is like us, that has 640 million acres that we can go recreate on basically for free. And so I think if we start there and have that conversation, it's a great way to unify people. And then I think then we can have the tougher conversations about use that happens on those public lands.
Yeah, and I think I'm talking and thinking a lot about just like general users of public lands, and like not necessarily other entities in the outdoor industry, but like what do you wish you could be seeing more from outdoor brands? Because I will be honest, with the public land sales aspects, I didn't really see a lot of noise from big players in the industry itself until it came close to the end. And then there was kind of more of a push, partially probably from public backlash, but like how should brands be getting involved in this? Because they do have a larger platform, and the economy of the outdoor industry rests on the availability of these public lands.
It's a great question. I think, to your point, I think they were almost forced into making comments around this sale of public lands because the people demanded it, right? And I think that we, the people, still have a voice, and I think we saw that with this whole public lands kind of sell off and like how that all went down. I mean, for any brands that are listening or people that want to support certain brands, is that yeah, it's probably makes you a little bit nervous about like getting a little bit involved in politics. But I would also say that we are looking for leadership, all of us, and like we're gonna shop where we think we see leadership. And so Patagonia, I think, is leading the way and has for a long time. They're 1% for the planet. Like they were very strong. They have been on all these issues, for a long time. And that makes people want to buy from them. And so I don't like, I think like for these brands that are listening or for people that are wanting to figure out what brands they go with, is that I think it's a great actual business strategy to stand for something, right? And to stand for these public lands where you are actually out there recreating. And sure, you may lose some people, you may, but I think the upside of that is you're going to gain so many more customers because you're doing the right thing for conservation, and that people recognize that, and then will spend their money. They'll use their dollars to really show who they support. So, and again, Patagonia is, I mean, I think the top notch on the whole conversation.
Yeah, with the public land sales in particular, I think it was interesting to see that, like, no matter really where people landed on the political spectrum, even many MAGA enthusiasts were opposed the public land sales. So I think it was an interesting opportunity to like kind of unify in a especially volatile political space. But I'm trying to think of the best way to wrap this up. So, what would you say? I feel like you've included a lot of great ways to get involved in some of the top issues to pay attention to right now. But what would be one tangible action that you think anyone could take to get involved in public lands advocacy within their respective communities?
So first, I think I would go back to like when you talked about how this is a big unifier. One of the reasons it's a big unifier is it doesn't matter who you voted for in your last election. It doesn't matter who your parents are. It doesn't matter how much money you have in your bank account. These public lands belong to all of us, right? Like it doesn't matter your background. And so that to me is such a unifier. And we need to continue to talk about that. And I think that's why you saw the pushback that you did, because it doesn't matter who you are. Like these lands belong to all of us and we all utilize them, or a lot of us do. As far as like, one thing you can do, and I talked about kind of the social media stuff and the phone calls, but I think we need to be talking to to our friends, to our dentists, to our like doctors, like I mean anybody that you interact with, and like having a conversation about why public lands are important to you. And I still think that like those individual conversations are going to carry the day and keep this ethos of going, that these lands belong to all of us. And so I think that's a very simple thing to do. It can be with family members, it can be with friends, but like when you're sitting around, all this got done with 4th of July, we're celebrating the independence of the United States. Like what is one of the best things about it is because we have public lands that belong to all of us. And so I think telling those stories on why they're important to you, and why you think that we should protect them, I think is a great way to just carry on this legacy, but also start conversations as others are thinking about it as well.
Yeah, I love that. I think that sometimes we underutilize our individual influence, like with our family members and people that we might just be even passing on a hiking trail, like meeting at a fishing spot or like at a grocery store, your dentist, like you said. I think those conversations can go a really long way. Is there anything else you wanted to add that you feel like you want to throw out there with anything that you have going on with? Oh, I keep wanting to call it Backcountry Hunters and Anglers, but I know that's the organization you used to work with.
American Hunters and Anglers.
Okay.
AHA. Like if you forget AHA,
Aha,
like,
American Hunters and Anglers.
There it is.
Okay.
There it is. I think what I'd leave with people is that, and we kind of started with this a little bit, Megan, is that there's so much going on right now and it feels very overwhelming. And that is by design. And that also people think that their voices don't count in this country anymore. And in some ways I would say, yeah, like billionaires have like stepped in and there's got a lot of influence over what is happening. But our voices don't count if we don't use them. And I still believe in democracy, and I still believe in the people. And so no matter what it is, I think like talking to your neighbors, taking action. Like if you're into art, make some like bumper stickers or make some drawings. If you're into music, make a song or like sing about, this land is your land, do a cover of it, whatever it is. Add your talent to this and do something about it, because I again, like the squeaky wheel gets the grease in this country, which basically means that like we the people have to stand up and say this is what we want. We have to demand it. And I think that happened in the public land sale. We should all, revel in that, I would say, but also know that this fight is far from over and there's many other things that are happening. But we the people, we showed up and said hell no, and it worked. It worked. So I think, for folks who don't think their voice counts anymore, I understand it, but it really doesn't count if you don't use it. And so that's what I would love for people to understand, is that, democracy is won by those who show up, and we the people just have to show up.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time today, Land, and thank you for all of the continued public land advocacy that you really push every day.
Well, thank you, Megan. And I think that you talked about how social media, I think it's like 70% of the people are getting their news off of social media, right? And I think, but podcasts are another opportunity for people to, learn more. And so we have to, engage in those things. And so thank you for this opportunity. Thank you for doing what you do. And, united we stand. And I really, truly believe that.
Thanks for listening. And if you like what you hear, let me know. Leave a review and be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. You can find us on Instagram at outdoor.minimalist.book, on YouTube, or subscribe to our weekly newsletter at theoutdoorminimalist.com. For even more updates, other educational resources, and to help build an outdoor community with the shared goal to create a better outdoor space as we recreate.